I think for all these vendors is, coming in and flipping a switch. That's what they all want. That's what a lot of them are promising, right? That's the gold
Mhm.
standards is just turn it on and you're going to be ready to roll. But again, it's about the people, it's about the culture, it's about the leadership. It's not
Mhm.
that simple.
Rise Up with Rise Growth Partners. Joe Duran and the Rise team share hard-won lessons from building top wealth management firms, showing you what it takes to create a lighthouse brand that inspires clients, attracts talent, and fuels growth.
Welcome to Rise Up. I'm Jennifer Geoghegan here with Jack Morgan. Jack is Rise Growth Partners head of the AI practice, and we are so happy to have him here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I'm really excited to have this conversation. As you know, AI is one of my favorite topics, and we talk about it a ton here. So I'm looking forward to jumping in today.
Great, let's dive in. And again, for the audience, what we're here to do is to educate and inspire advisors and firms who are looking to level up. So hopefully we could share a couple of ideas today that will help you, that you could immediately put into practice. So let's dive in today. Specifically, we want to talk not about what I think is often talked about, like the plethora of options in the industry. Every piece of technology has AI embedded, or they're on the path to embedding AI. There's so many tools out there. So we're not going to talk about the range of tools. We're going to talk about what more interests me, and I think you do, Jack, like how are firms actually using it and getting adoption and real traction, real results. So from your seat, you see what's happening at firms that we work with closely, and the many firms in the industry who we're not working closely with, but we talk to all the time. So we have a good handle on what's going on out there. What do you see happening if you look at these RIAs? Where are they dabbling? Where are they playing in this space?
Yeah, so I think, what we're seeing quite a bit of is a lot of firms are kind of jumping into like the gateway of AI, and that typically is showing up. The note takers, I would say, was like the first kind of tranche and the first wave. And so I think that paired with what we kind of call like the sidecar technology, or like your sidekick agent, which is the co-pilots and the chat GPTs, a lot of firms are going there first. And I think it's natural and it's organic, but the challenge becomes actually understanding and measuring like the value of bringing these tools into our firm every single day. And so I would say that's where we're seeing the majority of the dabbling. We also have, some vendors out there, which we're probably going to talk a little bit more about within the lead gen space with like an AI identified or Affinity. And we see a lot of firms going there as well, just because of how human that part of the business is and looking for ways to like amplify outreach and whatnot. So
Yeah.
it's still, I would say, it feels like AI has been around for a while, but it really is early days, I would say,
Mhm.
within kind of the wealth tech and the wealth management space. And so really again, like the main areas that we're seeing is looking for the productivity gains, and that's showing up with the note takers, the meeting prep, which is showing up with note takers, and that lead gen space we're seeing quite a bit of. There's a little bit more that we'll talk about, I think, later today, more around like how do we think about like a true AI driven firm.
Mhm.
And that's an incredibly exciting space. And there's a couple of vendors that we talk to regularly on that. But I think for now, the safe space that we're seeing firms go to is definitely like that productivity right out of the gate.
Yes. You can imagine, since I spend my day job on the organic growth side, I get called on from vendors. I'm sure all the advisors and leaders at the firms watching, they get called on constantly by all these vendors on the lead gen side, promising easy access to quick leads, a volume of leads.
Yep.
And they are intriguing, great shiny objects. Some of them, I think, have great promise, but I remain skeptical around adoption and engagement by the advisors, because few firms have really looked at that end-to-end process. To me, there's the leads, which is great, but you need to be able to make sure you're attracting the right leads, taking them through a process to close. And since many firms have not yet established that end-to-end system, it's just, they're paying for leads, which may or may not suit them. and they don't have that full process. So they end up disappointed and
Right.
likely have spent some money, and then they'll quit and move on to the next one.
Yeah, you're spot on, and I think a lot of that comes from, I mean, because to your point, like we've been on so many of these demos and like seeing these different tools and products, and they all look amazing, and the sales teams are phenomenal. And the challenge is, right, like we go back to the old adage within kind of just the technology space of like we have people, we have process and technology, and if we try and solve the technology before the process or the process before the people, the system kind of breaks down. And the challenge with these tools is we haven't culturally changed the way that we operate. And so we're just jumping straight in. We're signing on with these tools. We're bringing them in. They're promising lead flow, and we're getting the leads. And I mean, like directly, we've talked to a couple of advisors at one of our firms about this a couple of weeks ago. And he even said, he's like, we brought this tool in and it's great. But the reality is, like, who's going to use it every day? Like, who's in it? What's the operating system, so to speak, as we think about using this day in and day out? And so it's I think we're seeing a greater, I would, kind of commitment from these firms to do more and bring on onboarding teams and things like that. But the reality is that like we have to see the cultural shift at the firm in order for these things to be successful. And I think that there's a big Achilles heel that's showing up in the industry there right now, and that's going to be a space that we're going to have to see the vendors show up more in to be able to help with this problem.
Yes. And I think we're starting to see firms who have dabbled in these areas. They are waking up to it, and they're more skeptical about bringing on the next one until they can prove out that they can execute on their end, because it is still work and change on their end. And we'll get into the change management piece in a few. But I think another bright light, you mentioned like work, practice productivity, note takers, things like that. I think another area where it sounds like there's some progress is on the compliance side. Have you seen that?
There definitely is, and I think it's kind of funny, like compliant when you think about compliance and you think about AI, like you don't necessarily think that these things go hand in hand. And it's not just compliance. I think it's anything kind of around supervision and risk monitoring and things like that. And I think the interesting thing about that is that the activities themselves that they're taking a look at, like they are human behaviors, right? That's what compliance and risk monitoring. It's all about like what's your team doing, what are your advisors doing, but the reality is, what it's tracking isn't really the advisor behavior itself. It's tracking, are they hitting specific systems? Are there variations that we're seeing in risk? Are people acting differently? And those are things that are very rules based. And so the reason that AI works so well in those environments is because it's very predictable. It's very kind of using Joe's like complex and complicated. It's a
Mhm,
complicated problem to solve, but it's very solvable. It's just like what are the patterns that we're looking for?
mhm,
Are people doing things they're not supposed to? And so I think within the compliance space, it's a lot easier for companies to lean in and effectively say, quietly monitor my environment from the backside, see what's going on, notify
mhm,
me if there's an issue. But it's because there isn't really a human touch or a
mhm,
human capacity that's involved in that part of compliance.
mhm,
It's kind of a silent friend that's sitting in the background and watching and observing and tapping you
mhm,
on the shoulder when something goes wrong. And that is a lot easier to implement than it is to say a new kind of internal operating system for your firm on lead
mhm.
flow, because that's a cultural change. So
Right.
the compliance and risk space, it's primed for assistance with AI. And I think a lot of teams and firms should be leaning in there and looking for opportunities to help amplify their workforce by resourcing things related to lead gen and bringing in additional prospects and servicing their clients more holistically, and not actually using humans to do as much behind the scenes. And so I think there's that in itself is a cultural shift too. But that compliance space, it's just so much more black and white, and it's much easier than it is coming up with new behaviors of how a firm's going to operate with lead.
So it sounds like that's, if we pull apart where it works and where it's not that it doesn't work, but it's harder to make it work. It sounds like that's one piece of it. The cultural piece, the human behavior
Yeah,
piece. Do other things need to change other than flipping the switch and turning on a new piece of technology?
yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's I think for all these vendors, is coming in and flipping a switch. That's what they all want. That's what a lot of them are promising, right? That's the gold
Mhm,
standards. Is just turn it on and you're going to be ready to roll. But again, it's about the people. It's about the culture. It's about the leadership. It's not
mhm,
that simple. I think something else that I want to mention, and we have a lot of conversations about this, of like, where do we see AI working versus it not working, just like where's the stall out happen.
Mhm.
The reality is that I think a lot of firms they see AI as an evolution of the things that are happening today, and they're right in a way it is an evolution, but it's very different in how we should be thinking about interacting with AI. And I
Mhm.
think one thing that firms have to think about is like, what's your track record on change management? What's your track record on the ability to bring in new ideas, bring in new tools, create new processes and systems? And if you continually struggle to do those things, it's not going to be different with AI. It's not like
Yeah.
the implementation and the add of AI becomes easier because it's inherently AI. If anything, I would argue it's a little bit more challenging. And so I think there's a huge piece around like the leadership sponsorship aspect,
Mhm.
workflow integration, like the end to end kind of the soft things and the harder things. But the reality is, at the end of the day, like the stallouts are typically occurring because people think that it's just another thing that they're going to implement and that it's going to implement
Yeah.
itself. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for I think firms to like reevaluate what their track record is as they think about change and the change management mindset.
I think that's a great tip, Jack. I think about all the firms that we meet who have articulated really great visions and initiatives, and then they admit they haven't been able to execute um, either as flawlessly as they would like or at the pace they would like, or they abandon along the way. So I think that's a really good tip, especially as firms think about how many of these things to go after at once because they are being bombarded. You mentioned the vendor side. What do you see? I agree. The vendors are doing a great job of, coming up with cool technology, articulating the benefits well, having nice demos. It's all very impressive. But again, we do worry about the implementation side. What are vendors um, who do this well, like what are they doing differently? Because I can imagine a lot of clients signing up with certain vendors, but again, if they don't get the traction, they're not going to renew. So it seems to me there needs to be a balance and true support, a balance in terms of like what promises are being put out there, and then true support to go through with the implementation. But I'm curious, what do you see? What types of vendors are doing it right? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so I kind of say that there are vendors that just get it. Like they just get it when it comes to AI, and there's vendors that don't. So one, and you said this a minute ago, like there's so many different vendors these days. That's definitely something that we're seeing, and I know Kate just talks about it. The Ezra group talks about it. We see it at T3. Like just the volume of new vendors that have come online is absolutely incredible, and it's just because obviously this industry is just primed for a change in the space. Um, the vendors that get it, I think they're really starting from square one and they're starting with what's the problem that they're trying to solve. And that seems so simple and elementary, but I think the challenge is there are other vendors that are kind of like they're swinging big and they're not necessarily thinking about the industry. In most cases, what's really come up in talking with a lot of these teams is that we're getting these really technical CEOs and leaders and individuals that don't fully understand the wealth management space, or we
Mhm.
have the opposite that we have really great wealth management domain expertise, but they don't fully understand the technology. And so the vendors that really get it, they understand what their weaknesses are as individuals. And I genuinely believe it starts with the people that are leading these companies and understand that they have gaps and blind spots in the industry. And some of the most powerful relationships that we've seen are the ones where you have this incredibly great tech mind. Maybe it's an ex Amazon leader or something like that that's then partnering up with somebody that's well known in the RIA space, and they're bringing that together to try and create the best system possible. So I think that's one thing that makes the really good vendors. The second one is that the really great ones, they're very, very hands-on. And I don't just mean that the firm is, but the leadership at the firm is very hands-on and engaged in what's happening. We have seen a couple vendors that will tout that they have an implementation team and so on and so forth, but it's clear that the individuals that are focusing on implementation aren't thinking the same way culturally about the AI shift as the leadership team is. So that's, I think, a second thing that we're seeing. And then the third thing, and this is kind of the more, I guess, like unfun, unsexy part of it, but it's a reality. is that the newer systems that are working the best, they are new and they are built new. And the reason that matters is because there's a lot of data that's related to AI systems as we can imagine. And the challenge is when you take systems that have been built 10 years ago and we've been enhancing and enhancing and enhancing, you're going to be limited by the technology that you're going to be able to get out of it and the AI that you can ingrain into it because of how the systems were built. The
Mhm.
newer systems, they are new systems, they are new technologies, they are new platforms, and they're leveraging kind of the best in class of how technology can be used today. And there's a stark contrast. Like when we talk to a vendor that has come online in the last 3 years versus a big vendor that's been around for 10, 15, 20 years and they're adding AI, there's a huge contrast in how they show up. And I would say like the
Mhm.
speed of market to implementation looks to be very, very different. So those are kind of the main things that we're seeing across it. And like I said, I think at the end of the day, the most important one is the eagerness and the willingness of these leaders of these firms to lean in and actually help as part of the onboarding process. That's where we're seeing the most success show up at these firms.
Mhm. Not just give you a bunch of tools and templates and say,
Right.
go at it. Got it. Lots of great tips, Jack. Let's boil it down a bit for the audience before we go. So let's go back to um, what are, let's say, what are 3 tips we could give to, say, leaders of a firm as they're evaluating where do I lean into AI and how do I identify where to start?
So the tips that I would give, so number one would be really focusing on like who is kind of taking the charge of AI at your firm. We're seeing a lot, and I think this is like a normal first step that you kind of give somebody the responsibility of AI. I think that works at first. The reality is this has to be a passionate individual that's actually like doing AI outside of work that they are focused on it. So I think one is, do you have the right people at your firm leading your charge of AI? I think that's a very important thing. And that, a CEO that comes back from a conference and says, I want to add this tool, that doesn't count, right? This is somebody
Right.
that's actually thinking about the implications. I think two is understanding the business problem that you're trying to solve. And again, it's a simple one. Like we keep going back to that one, but it's often overlooked. We just say, we want a note taker because my friend at a firm has it. But like, what's the value proposition? What are you trying to get out of it? What's the goal? What does success look like? Like being intentional about these decisions and writing these things down is incredibly critical for the onboarding process. And then number three, and I think this is uncomfortable for some, is that investing in AI sometimes is a sunk cost, and you have to get comfortable with that. With the amount of change that we're going through in the industry, you're going to run into scenarios and situations that you run a test, you implement a note taker, you try a sidecar technology, whatever you do, and you realize it's not worth it for you. So I think protecting yourself by
Mhm.
focusing on long-term trials and things like that are far more critical to implementing AI than it is to just kind of grab it for the sake of grabbing it.
Mhm. And all good tips, Jack. Anything you would add if we think about firms that are well positioned to have long-term success in integrating AI effectively into their firms? Anything else come to mind before we leave the audience?
Yeah, so I'll just share. So last fall, we were talking to a pretty large firm in Georgia, and um, having an open conversation about AI. And I said, "Listen, I know a lot of people are afraid of like data leaks, this, that, and the other." And someone in the room spoke up and said, "I'm not worried about the data leaks. I'm worried about the 25 bips AI built RIA that comes online and takes everybody out of business."
Mhm.
And I think like there was this eye-opening moment and everyone in the room kind of chuckled at it. But the reality is that like somebody out there is trying to build that. And I
Mhm.
think what's different about that model, to your question, Jen, is that this isn't just about bolting on AI here and AI there and targeting like little kind of target use cases and whatnot. We need to start thinking more broadly about how we think about
Mhm.
AI as an operating system within a firm. And so we're not just necessarily going after a point solution here and a point solution there. The
Mhm.
firms that will thrive in the age of AI are going to invest in AI driven platforms that are actually able to really orchestrate the entire engine. And you can get your people back to focusing on what matters most, which is building relationships at the end of the day and let technology run everything behind the scenes. I think we're already seeing it. We're talking to firms that are already doing it. There are already technologies out there that can handle it. But that's going to be a huge cultural shift for this industry of finding the
Mhm.
fine line between what goes to AI and what do I keep in house.
Well, that sounds like a fun topic. I think you'll be invited back just to talk about just that. How about it?
Awesome.
Well,
Sounds awesome.
thanks, Jack. This was a fun conversation. I hope it was helpful to our audience. I know AI is on everybody's minds. There's conferences that are now 100% dedicated to AI. So if there are specific questions that we can address in the next episode, please put them in the comments, shoot us an email. We'd love to hear from you. And Jack, we will see you back soon.
All right. Thanks, Jen. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.